This is my September wrap up. Before I begin, I do want to say ignore any background noise that might be going on. I have 2 new kittens and they're having a grand old time in here. I could have shut them in the other room, but I felt really bad doing so because no one else is here but me today, so I don't want them to turn into weirdos who are unsocialised. So they're here in the room with me, they can listen to me talk about books. I had such a great reading month in September. I feel like I am finally getting back to my usual type of reading now that the stress of planning the wedding and going abroad to other people's weddings is over. I'm feeling so much more relaxed, and it does also help that work has calmed down a little. It's still very, very busy, but it's a manageable type of busy. So I am very, very happy. I read 9 books in September and my average rating was something like 3.89. It was wild. I had such a good time. I cannot express how good my reading month was. So I kicked off the month with 2 books by K.A. Tucker. I read the second and third books in the Wild series. This is a trilogy with 1 novella as well, and I haven't read the novella yet, but I do think I want to because I'm obsessed with these characters. I read these 2 books while I was in Italy. It was a bit strange, a bit of a juxtaposition, reading a book set in Alaska while I was in Rome where it was like 32 degrees. But it's just what I was in the mood for. I wanted a contemporary romance with an atmospheric setting, and that's definitely what this was. So this series, it starts off with The Simple Wild, which I do actually have on my shelf. Let me grab it. This one is the first book and it follows a woman called Calla who lives in Toronto, I believe. She lives in a city in Canada and her parents are divorced. Her father was or is Alaskan and her mother, I believe, is Canadian. And they split up because her mother was really a city girl at heart and she didn't do well living with Calla's father in Alaska, in rural Alaska, where he ran his airplane company. So Calla hadn't seen her father in many, many years. She had spoken to him over the phone when she was younger, but at some point they just stopped talking, they lost touch because he didn't make the time for her, and in the end that just got too much for her and she found it easier to just not talk to him at all. So right at the beginning of the book, Calla loses her job and she breaks up with her boyfriend, and then to top it all off, she receives a phone call from her father's neighbour and friend who lives in Alaska near him, saying that her father is unwell, he has cancer, and the neighbour is asking whether Calla can come and see her father because he'd really like to see her, but he's too much of a wuss to call her himself and ask. So the neighbour is reaching out on his behalf. So Calla isn't really sure, but she figures that she might regret it if she doesn't go and see her father while he's sick, so she plans to spend a week over in Alaska. And just like her mother, she is not made for Alaska and rural living at all. She's got no idea of the challenges that await her. She goes with several suitcases, loads of designer clothes. She ends up having to leave them all behind because they won't fit on the tiny plane that she has to get on. But she does make it to Alaska and she meets her father, Ren, and gets to know the townsfolk in this rural village, and she learns a lot about herself and about Alaska. She also meets a guy called Jonah who works for her father and he is a pilot, and the two start to fall for each other. It's a really, really good book. I loved this one. I probably am going to up my rating to 5 stars. I think I gave it 4.5 at the time, but I'm going to give it 5 because it's brilliant. And the second one, Wild at Heart, is also about Calla trying to settle in, navigate her relationship with Jonah when he's always out flying, and learning how to deal with having a pilot for a partner because Jonah, he's not like a commercial airline pilot, he's a small town rural pilot who flies like tiny planes across the wilderness to like deliver goods and stuff. So I gave Wild at Heart 4.5 stars as well. I may up that to 5 stars at some point, and then I went directly into Running Wild, which is the 3rd book in the series, because I just could not. I loved these characters and I loved Alaska so much. I really wanted to read more about it. Wild at Heart actually wraps up Calla's story with Jonah, and so the next book, Running Wild, follows Marie, who we do see in the first 2 books. She's Jonah's best friend who also has a crush on him. So Marie in the 3rd book is kind of figuring out how to deal with the loss of a best friend because their relationship just isn't the same anymore, and also with the disappointment of not being able to be with him because they're not the right people and it definitely wasn't the right time for them. And if it had been the right time, they weren't the right people for each other anyway. So she spends a lot of the book thinking about that and how to get over what she thought she could have with Jonah. It's not necessarily getting over Jonah, it's more getting over the feeling that she thought that she would spend the rest of her life with someone because they were a perfect match, and then being sorely, sorely disappointed. At the beginning of the book, Marie meets a competitive musher called Tyler. He's just moved to town with his sled dogs, and the two, it's a romance book, so you know, the two of them are going to get together. Tyler is dealing with a lot lot of his own stuff as well. I wouldn't say this book is entirely about the romance either. Like the other two books before it, this book is more about Marie and navigating her feelings and her life and figuring out kind of who she is, because she is, I think, in her late 30s at the start of this book, and her sisters are already married, already having children, and she feels like she does want to be a vet and she wants to look after her father's family veterinary hospital business. She doesn't want that to be all that she is, and I did find Marie to be a very interesting character. I didn't really like her in the first two books, and I did find her a little bit annoying at the beginning of this one with the Jonah stuff, but honestly I ended up really liking her, and I gave this book 4 stars because, again, I just could not get enough of these characters and this setting. I haven't yet read Forever Wild, which is the novella. I think I've already mention that. It's just a short story about the holiday season with Calla and Jonah. I think I'm gonna save this one for December, and I typically don't like short stories, but because I love these characters so much, I do think I'm going to really enjoy this one, so I'm really excited to get to it. I may read it sooner if I feel like it, but this will be a really good one for the Christmas season, I think. Next, I read Holly Jackson's newest book, which is Not Quite Dead Yet. This is her adult thriller debut. This one follows a woman called Jet. On the night of Halloween, is attacked and she is hit around the head and almost murdered, and she wakes up in hospital and is told that she doesn't really have much time left. She can either have an operation to try to stop an aneurysm from building in her brain, and there's like a 90% chance that she will die on the table, or she can wait for the aneurysm to kill her in roughly a week's time. And Jet chooses to go with the latter option. She wants to try to find out who tried to murder her, and so she wants to spend the last 7 or so days of her life figuring that out. I did really enjoy this one. I gave it 4 stars, but I don't think it's Holly Jackson's typical kind of book. Although saying that, that's not actually true. Now that I've said it, I think this is the direction that Holly Jackson has been going in for a few years now. This one felt like her standalone thrillers like 5 Survive and the reappearance of Rachel Price. The main character was very angry and direct and also just quite sad, and I feel like that's the direction that Holly Jackson has been going in since As Good as Dead, which is the 3rd book in the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series. And I think readers have very mixed opinions and feelings on that, because those 3 books or these 4 books are very different to the first 2 books in the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series. Sorry, they're shaking their little ball thing. So I find it very interesting that she's decided to sort of sway into this direction with the angry female character being so prevalent in each book. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I do quite enjoy it. I just feel like it's becoming a little bit samey because she's writing the same type of character over and over again, even though they've all got their own things going on. I thought this one was super fast paced. It made me very emotional at the end, which is always good with a thriller. I only gave it 4 stars because it's not an all-time favourite, and honestly, if the writing wasn't so good, I'd probably have given it a 3. But Holly Jackson is a very good writer, and I really enjoyed trying to figure out who tried to kill Jet and all the different threads there. Most of it was very predictable because I've read so many thrillers at this point. I was able to figure out what was going on, but there were some things that surprised me. I just got like the general gist of what was happening. After Not Quite Dead Yet, I wanted to read something a little bit lighter and something that I could really fly through, and I decided to reread Love Bites by Lindsay Sands. This is the 2nd book in the Argenau Vampires series. I read this when I was a lot younger. I probably read this in like 2008, I would say. This is a super long urban fantasy series, paranormal romance series about the Argenau family who are vampires. And the twist on this one is that they are vampires from Atlantis. And so they're sort of genetically engineered vampires rather than your typical spooky vampire. This one follows Etienne, who is, I think, the youngest brother in the sort of main or original Argenau family. He is a game designer and he has a stalker who is convinced that he's a vampire and he wants to kill him. But Etienne is actually really lovely and he doesn't want to get rid of his stalker, even though it would like technically be self-defense. So he's kind of just letting him, the stalker, do worse and worse stuff to him, like blowing up his car and almost killing him, until he's finally going to be pushed to do something about the situation. As the stalker is doing, you know, stalking, murderous sort of things, Etienne ends up in the morgue and his body is regenerating, and there's also a woman, a human woman at the time, called Rachel, who works in the morgue, and she gets caught up in this murderous plot by the stalker and she gets turned into a vampire, and then the romance begins from there. I really enjoyed this one. Again, I gave it 5 stars originally. I didn't really feel the need to change my rating. I would probably give it 4 stars now. I think it's held up surprisingly well for such an old book. This came out in 2004. I'm going to carry on with this series. I think I got up to number 16 before. So I'm just going to slowly read these throughout my life, I guess, and carry on because it is a fun series, even if it does get a bit repetitive if you read the books back to back. I'm really excited to get to some of the other characters that I remember really liking, like the grumpy uncle. I think his name was Lucien. I really liked him and I really liked his book, so looking forward to that. Next up, I picked up I Who Have Never Known Men. I read this one in less than a day. It's very good. It's very short as well, so that, you know, that helped. I got slightly interrupted there by the cats. Put them in their own room now. But I think I was just about to talk about I Who Have Never Known Men. So this is about a woman who has grown up in a cage with a bunch of other women. I think there were maybe like 40 of them in this cage, and they can't really remember much about their lives before this. The main character has been in the cage since she was a child, so she literally doesn't remember anything from her time before. But the others have vague recollections of their families, of the world outside. They're not allowed to touch each other, they're not allowed to do much, really, although they are allowed to interact with each other and talk and things. The cage is seemingly underground, there's no natural lights, and there are male guards, but they don't interact with these prisoners, these women. They just patrol. The book starts with the main character starting to question why she is there, what the guards are up to, why they're not allowed to interact, and she starts to notice weird patterns or non-patterns in the guards' behaviour, and then this triggers sort of the main character wanting to know what's going on. The book is very fast-paced. As I said, I read it in just a day. I think this is actually a really good one to discuss with other people. This would be a really good book club book. It's translated from French, and I have to say the translator has done a fantastic job. I've obviously not read the French original, but as someone who is interested in languages, linguistics, I do like to analyse the text and try to work out how good the translation is, or try to, not necessarily whether it's accurate, but whether the translator has also written a good book, if that makes sense, because that is sometimes the case, that the translator does a word-for-word translation, it all makes sense in context and everything, but it's not a good story, it's not a good book. But the translator for this one was absolutely brilliant. As I said, there's a lot to talk about with this one, and I don't think I want to talk about all of those things here. I may do a separate discussion video, but to do that I'll probably want to reread parts of this book and make some notes and things. I think this book is very thought-provoking and impactful. It talks lots about womanhood and connections. A lot of this is about community and survival as well. It's very interesting, and I did find it interesting to read about the author. She is, or was, I'm not sure if she's still living, Jewish, and her family fled the Nazi regime and they weren't able to return home until after the war, obviously. Knowing that about the author made this reading experience very even more impactful, I think. I think once you know the author's background, you're able to make certain connections and see certain themes within this one. As I said, I could probably talk about this one for ages, but I do want to maybe do a whole discussion video on it if anyone would be interested, or maybe I just want to get my other friends to read it and we can talk about it together. Let me know if you would like a video on this and we can go on a deep dive. Overall, really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. Next, I read a book called The Scourge Between Stars. I said that a bit weirdly. Moving on. This is a very short sci-fi horror book about a woman called Jacqueline? I think her nickname was Jack. And she is on a spaceship and she was meant to be going towards, or her people were meant to be heading towards a planet, but it goes terribly, they turn back around, and the ship isn't doing so well, so they're not sure they'll ever return to any planet. They may just get stuck in space and die there. And then on top of that, absolute horror, there's also something on the ship, and it starts picking off the crew. And so Jacqueline has to investigate, fight off whatever's on the ship, and just survive. I gave this one 2.5, 3 stars. I didn't like it. I have issues with short stories anyway. They often don't work for me because they just feel like I'm being plonked into the middle of a story and there's no sort of padding or introductory, yeah, I guess it would be padding, introductory padding that I would normally enjoy. I really like getting to know characters, and I didn't feel like I could with a book this short. It's only 160 pages long, and I would have preferred a full-length novel, although at the same time I'm not sure there was enough substance here to make this a full-length novel. So that's really disappointing. I feel like I saw like flickers of where the author could have gone if this had been expanded, but unfortunately I didn't love it. Something else I read in September was Silver Elite. This is a very popular book talk book. I think the author or the book itself has been a topic of some controversy. Some people were saying that the book is AI written, and people have been trying to find out who the author is because Danny Francis seems to be a pen name. I didn't really know much about any of that drama before going into this book. To be honest, I kind of went into this just looking for a fun fantasy dystopian kind of book, and that's what this is. I gave it 4 stars, Objectively, it's probably more of a 2 because the world building is absolutely atrocious. Some of the character actions make no sense, but I had such a good time reading it that I've given it 4. It was just really, really entertaining, and honestly that's what I'm looking for in this kind of book. So this book follows a girl called Wren Darlington. I think she's like in her early 20s, and she has been in hiding because she has psychic abilities. And in this dystopian, futuristic America, United States, people with psychic gifts are called mods, and they are basically hunted down. Some of them are forced to work for the new government, and others are put into labour camps. And some are just killed outright. And Wren is super special because she has some really advanced powers. So she has been in hiding with her uncle. Her uncle is found and killed, and so Wren joins a training academy through various circumstances, and she starts training to be part of the Silver Elite, which is a branch of the government's army. So she's working for the enemy while also working for the uprising of mods. And that's basically all there is to it. We follow Wren as she's going through her training program. There's a hot guy there who I think the author was trying to like imitate Xaden but didn't do the best job of it because honestly the main guy was just kind of dull. His name is Cross, and I judged him for that. He didn't really have much of a personality to be honest, but I still had a really good time reading it. It was just so much fun, and it's just the kind of book that you can just sort of lose yourself in for a few hours and just have a fun time. So don't go into this expecting the best written book, the most thought out world building. Honestly, the world building, the more I thought about it afterwards, the worse the world building got. As I said, none of it made any sense. And the characters' decisions, Wren's decisions towards the end, she was honestly just an idiot, and I don't know how she has survived for so long. It was clearly down to her uncle, because without him she just doesn't know what she's doing. But it's a fun book. That's what you should take away from this mini review. This is a fun book and you should read it if that's what you want. I then read a couple of witchy books, and I'll be talking about these more in a reading vlog, so I won't go into too much detail here. The first one was Human Rights by Juno Dawson. This does mean that I finished a series, so go me. This is the third book in the Her Majesty's Royal Coven series, and I gave this one 3.5 stars, which I think is the same rating that I gave to The Shadow Cabinet. Even though I gave HMRC 5 stars, the other books that follow it just didn't hold up to that standard. I found the first 3/4 of this book to be really quite boring, and it's such a shame because I loved the first book so much. Books 2 and 3 just go off on like a very different tangent or in a very different direction. I did really like the bits at the end that I'm not going to go into detail about, but included one of my favourite things that's sometimes in fantasy or sci-fi books. So I really enjoyed the ending to this and all of the like mind-bendy stuff, but for the most part I just thought this was fairly average. It wasn't the strongest ending of the series, which is a huge shame. I really enjoyed following all of these characters who I can't name because it will spoil the other books in the series. I did enjoy following them, even Leonie, for example, who in the second book was just kind of going off and doing her own thing. She had a bit of a weird thing going on in this book as well, but she was at least present for a lot of the plotting while the witches prepared for war. I actually enjoyed her a lot more in this book than I did in the previous one. So yeah, not the strongest ending to the series, but I did still enjoy it, and I'm glad that I did finish the series. I'm not sure I'm too compelled to try out anything else that Juno Dawson releases, just because she's not my favourite author. Like the writing in this just, it was good but not amazing, so I don't know. If she brings out something similar to this in the future, then maybe. I do enjoy my witchy books, so maybe I'll give it a go, but otherwise good series, I'd recommend it. And then I also listened to a non-fiction book called Witchcraft, A History in 13 Trials. I started this in the summer just after my honeymoon, and this is exactly what it says on the tin. It's a look at witchcraft through the ages, starting in I think like the 1500s in Europe, and it goes through the years talking about the witch trials, 13 witch trials that have happened, and how culturally opinions and feelings about witches have changed. And at the end it talks about how it's still impactful and relevant today. So very interesting. I really enjoyed this one. I had such a good time with it. The audiobook is also very good if you were interested in listening to that. I did find it very dry, but I didn't mind that because obviously this is a non-fiction book. I just kind of accepted that that was how it was going to be, and I didn't have a problem with that. Listening to it helped with that dryness as well because the narrator was very good, and I'm really glad that I've got this book as a reference for when I'm reading fictional stories about witches, because many of these women in here are also subjects of fictional stories that are being published, and it's really nice to have the actual story of what was going on with them in real life and how society reacted to them or society absolutely failed them. So very, very interesting. And if you're interested in witchcraft or feminism, women's rights, I would definitely recommend that you check this one out. I gave this one 4 stars. So those are all the books that I read in September. I am also halfway through The Will of the Many, but I'm not going to talk about that here. I'm going to talk about that in a separate video and in my wrap up in October. So thank you for watching. Let me know if you've read any of these, what you thought of them. Tell me what your favourite reads of September were in the comments below, and I'll talk to you in the next video. Bye!